raise some
Cain. You gotta raise some Cain. In the heartland where the faith runs strong, we've seen the shadows growing long. Watch those around us be deceived. Yeah, the fight is at our doors, no matter who we believe. Corruption, lawless day and night, we'll speak the truth into the light. We'll bring the battle, heed the call, watch the whole thing fall. We gotta raise some Cain, show the lies, break some chains and make things right. Feel the power, be the change, time is now. We gotta raise some Cain.
Welcome to the Raising Cain Show, where we tackle the most critical issues facing our republic today. I'm your host, Nate Cain, and tonight we have an incredible panel of guests whose work is making waves in the fight for truth, accountability, and justice in healthcare. First, we're honored to welcome Mic Rosado. Mic is a compassionate nurse with a Bachelor of Science in Nursing, a fierce advocate for medical freedom, and the host of the acclaimed podcast, Intentional. Mic's mission is to shine a light on the uncomfortable truths and give voice to those whose lives have been affected by the failures in our healthcare system. Joining her is Rachel Rodriguez, an esteemed attorney with the VIRES Law Group. Rachel has been at the forefront of the legal battle to expose the systemic failures in COVID hospital protocols. Her work has been instrumental in crafting legal briefs to pursue grand jury investigations and RICO charges, all aimed at seeking justice for countless families demanding answers. Together, these two trailblazers are leading the charge for transparency and reform in our nation's healthcare system. Tonight, we'll dive deep into their groundbreaking efforts and explore what it means for families across America. Thank you both for joining the show tonight.
Thank you for having us.
So I guess I'll start with asking you both, what inspired you to take on such a monumental challenge as addressing COVID hospital protocols? Because obviously, I've never seen anything else in our history where we've been so banned in terms of just being able to even talk about it, let alone challenge the vaccines and the hospital protocols. It seems like there's a huge medical industrial complex. So what inspired you to get into this?
Well, I'll just jump in there. I use my elbows. So first of all, Nate, thank you so much for having Rachel and I on your show. We are very grateful to be able to speak about what we are doing on the local level in pursuit of defending medical freedom. I know that you were one of the signers of the Military Declaration of Accountability that was sent to the Department of Defense. And you guys really kind of led the way there regarding, sending, a notice to the Department of Defense, especially when they were mandating, the COVID-19 injection for military service members, get it or get out. So I know you understand that what really needs to happen is the exposure of the COVID criminal enterprise. But I myself, I'm a nurse. I've been in nursing for 28 years. I'm an advocate. I'm a defender of medical freedom. It's a huge part of who I am, Nate. But when COVID came around, that was the the most significantly negative shift within healthcare industry that I ever saw. And I believe that COVID was a bioweapon released upon the world. I believe that with everything that I am. The use of the COVID hospital protocols were the reason for the massive amounts of death that we saw during COVID. People are still going into hospitals and they're unaware that these protocols are being used. They're unaware that these protocols were the catalyst that was used in order to push the mRNA injections that are not safe, not effective. And those injections were deployed to make money, gain power, and control. And so, real quickly, I was working in clinical trials when we started using mRNA technology. It was around 2019, and we were using it for people who had relapsed from bone marrow transplant. Now, the goal was to stimulate their immune system, but we knew how ill those patients were going to be. We knew they were going to go into cytokine storm. We knew we had to have icy beds, emergency measures. And so, because of the fact that we were so heightened that we had to have emergency protocols, when the Biden-Harris administration mandated a countermeasure across the nation that was experimental using mRNA technology, Nate, that was a line that never should have been crossed, particularly for pregnant women, babies, and children. But then in 2021, I started hearing that they were using a drug called remdesivir that had been used by Fauci and Barrick, Dr. Fauci, Dr. Barrick, in the Congo when they were doing clinical Ebola clinical trials, using it for Ebola in the clinical trials. Anyhow, that drug was removed because it had a greater than 50% death rate. It had a 20% increase in kidney failure, and it also had an increase in multi-organ failure. And then we have now discovered that remdesivir was actually given as part of a COVID protocol used on military service members.
Mm-hmm.
The Department of Defense in clinical trials back in March of 2020, and the death rate there was 64%.
Jeez.
I know. And it was much more than that, Nate. I mean, the testimonies that we have gotten, people across the nation. I've talked to people from New Jersey to California. They were dehydrated, they were starved, they were discriminated because of their vax status. They were put in chemical and physical restraints. They were denied the early use of ivermectin, even though, Nate, that was part of the COVID protocol. They rushed them to intubation, ventilation. There was a lack of informed consent. You could see there's a paper and all it says is patient. There's no name written on it. I mean, there's so many egregious wrongdoings that we have encountered through these testimonies. But we also know that this was financially incentivized. Dr. Merrick, back in January of 2022, spoke to Senator Ron Johnson in a COVID misinformation U.S. Senate hearing, and he exposed all of that. So, the thing of it is that, here in the state of Oklahoma, we are really kind of declaring the doctrine of the lesser magistrate. We're basing it on the principle of interposition. We're kind of seeing all of this, and we're saying to our Attorney General, Gettner Drummond, stand in the gap and open up criminal investigations and prosecutions into the COVID hospital protocol deaths. I mean, we are using a standard state criminal procedure in order to press charges, and the statutory basis for that investigation includes RICO charges, and I know Rachel can speak more to that. I just want people to be aware that in the state of Oklahoma, the CDC reported that 20,000 Oklahomans died of COVID. Well, Nate, excuse me, I'm sorry. We know they weren't being pulled off of the streets dead. We know they weren't being pulled out of their homes deceased. We know, based of the eyewitness testimonies, that these people were dying in the hospitals because of the protocols that were being used, that are still being used today. So our goal is really to get accountability
Mhm.
and justice and expose the truth of what I'm calling a democide,
Yeah.
and make sure that this never happens again. And we were very blessed to have one of our representatives open up a COVID interim study, and that sort of opened up the doors. We were
Yeah.
able to bring in doctors and lawyers, and we were able to do show some evidence, of why we need to have these investigations and the dangers of the mRNA protocol. And so that's kind of how that whole ball rolled together. And then Rachel, her team of the Virus Law Group, wrote the brief, and
Mhm.
now that's in the hands of Gettner Drummond, and we're awaiting his action. But now we're going into the communities to reach the people, to let them know about this
That's
information.
great. Rachel, can you break down the key findings from the COVID interim study and explain why they're significant to the public?
Well, absolutely. So we had several experts that were speaking, and I don't claim the expertise that they brought to the table, but essentially, I think Mick touched upon sort of the overall enterprise, and that's what these experts were talking about from the very beginning of the illegal gain of function research that brought
Mhm.
us the bioweapon virus, and then from there, the leaking of that, and then Dr. David Martin went through the history of this, that there is an intent behind this. Things were planned out many, many years in advance to get to
Mhm.
this point. This is not a novel coronavirus or pandemic. These are all things that were planned out. And so you have then the release of the bioweapon. Then you get to what is it, what's going on in the hospitals. And we had a discussion about the countermeasures, and I think Mick has done a good job of sort of highlighting what those main points are. And then you also have we had a deep discussion regarding the mRNA shots, and again, Mick
Mhm.
has touched upon that. But essentially, these are they're more harm than benefit, and that was known early on as well. That's another thing that we can see from the records. And so, kind of bringing that home, it's like, well, why can't we address this in the civil context? And you asked
Mhm.
earlier, why did we get into this? Well, that was my impetus for getting into asking for criminal investigation and charges. I had many people coming to my office because they knew I was willing to address the COVID delusion and the COVID crimes. And
Mhm.
and I was trying to look into, well, is there anything we can do on the civil side in Florida, meaning medical malpractice, wrongful death actions?
Right.
And
Which there there's
to
a there's
my
a there's a famous video, and I can't remember who it is in there, but he's talking about the leading cause of death, and most people would say heart attack, or they'll list something else, and he says no, it's actually medical malpractice.
medical
and
malpractice,
and that is an important factor in this, because obviously there were things that were done that they had no basis for doing. And the worst part about this whole thing is that I think everybody can understand if you have a new virus or disease, and you're doing the best that you can to try to to mitigate it or help people. But as you learn information, as you discover things, then better protocols, better things that you can do, or um, drugs that could be used in treatment, like ivermectin, which has turned out to be an amazing drug in fighting COVID, hydroxychloroquine and others. They should have been allowing these things to be used, but it's clear
that's right.
that there was money behind the decisions that were made. Is that really the basis of the RICO charges? And for our audience that may not understand what RICO is, can you explain that?
Sure. So yes, in short, yes. When you have a criminal enterprise, you have parties that are engaging in misconduct for profit, and they're doing so
Mhm.
in collusion with one another towards a particular end or aim of the entire enterprise. And so here you have that. You have those who were researching and creating a bioweapon. those who released the bioweapon in order to then have the protocols that they could make a lot of money off of these patients. And frankly, it's so perverse, the level of incentives, that it was more profitable to ensure that the patient died than anything else. And that's just evil. Let's call it what it is. And so the hospital administrators were profiting greatly off of this. And of course, you have all the drugs of the protocols, which were also lethal. And Mick made mention of remdesivir. That was not the only drug. And these are very expensive. And so you had royalties and dare I call them kickbacks going to policymakers and those who had their name on the development of these drugs, the same ones that were putting these into the protocols. And then you had, you even had Woodcock from the FDA, I believe, and she was ensuring that the hydrochloroquine, the federal stockpile of the hydrochloroquine could not be administered in mass and outpatient. The way that the agreement between the federal government and the states was orchestrated essentially precluded anybody from getting hydrochloroquine, even though that was the aim of the Trump administration at that time, early on in 2020. And then from there, again, you have and this is one of the elements of the brief. In the states that have anti-terrorism laws, we've actually, this is not the only state, Oklahoma, that we've submitted these charges and this evidence. But in Oklahoma, there is a state anti-terrorism statute, and so we've included that because the deaths in the hospitals, the hospital homicide, as I call it, caused people to believe that this virus was more deadly than it actually was. And that was towards the aim of terrorizing the community in order to get them to move in a particular direction. In this case, both policymakers to ensure that policies would encourage the mRNA shots, but also that the public would be pressured into taking them. And so that, again, that's part of the enterprise. You have those who are administering the shots and manufacturers who are making the shots, profiting off of that. And the entirety, every single piece of this horrific plan, everybody made money. And that's the criminal enterprise.
There's another enterprise that I haven't heard many people talk about, but I was shocked when I started doing a little bit of research into the amount of money that the U.S. government spent on COVID vaccines and things like that. But I was even more surprised to find out that we actually spent, even more money on testing. And who purchased the PCR test? The company making the PCR test was Bill Gates and George Soros in a joint venture. And of course, he was very involved in I think it was what was the name of the company? Not Pfizer, Moderna. He was involved in Moderna, had some shares in that. I think he sold them. But to me, this very much looks like organized crime. It looks like, they were influencing politicians, influencing, leadership within NIH and CDC. You, Mick, I think mentioned about the pregnant women who were given the vaccine. There's a really interesting part of this that to me shows absolutely, criminal culpability, which is Walensky, who had knowledge 5 days before she made the public declaration that pregnant women and nursing women should be given the vaccine. Yet she had seen internal reports, internal evidence from Pfizer, I think it was, that there were majorly increased rates of stillborn and the death of fetuses also for pregnant women. And then also there was also children who were nursing, babies that were nursing, they were actually receiving the spike protein through the mother's milk and getting sick. And when they did autopsies of the fetuses, they found that the spike protein was able to get past the blood-brain barrier. And that's what was, the brains of these infants were filled with the spike protein. How in the world was Walensky able to walk away from that and not be put in jail?
I wish I knew, but Nate, working in clinical trials, the golden rule that we had, it is the golden rule. You do not give experimental injections, vaccines to pregnant women ever. That was the one reason that we took people off of clinical trials, is if they became pregnant, because you don't know the effects that will happen to not just the mother, but the infant as well. And you're absolutely correct. They have found that the spike protein that they said, oh, that's going to stay in the deltoid, did not stay in the deltoid. It went to the gonads. It went to the brain. They found it
I think the female ovary was one of the one of the places where it went more than anywhere else.
It was targeting that.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, you have to question. Sorry, Mick, you have to question.
No, go ahead.
The intention of this, that the spike proteins actually targeted reproductive organs.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Targeted
well,
them.
Then on top,
and there are Oh, I'm sorry. There are studies now, just so you know, where they are actually monitoring right now the amount of spike in the sperm. They are, but they're having to do that on their own. I mean, that's not being done by the CDC or any of them.
NIH actually released just this week a study showing a direct correlation between the COVID vaccine and increased rates of Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
And after the show, I'll send you that article. And it's unbelievable what they allowed to happen in this. Remember when Trump first, pushed forward with the warp speed, he had made it very clear that this was, being done as an option for those who were at high risk that wished to do this. It was not mandated, but the moment that they mandated this, and I think the moment that they withheld information from the public about the dangers of the vaccine that they knew about, and also about they censored information, for drugs that were readily available, things like ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, and they spread disinformation. The government did this, so and hospitals, they were a party to this. To me,
that's right.
Anybody involved in this needs to be in jail.
Absolutely. I think it's
that's what we're trying to do, Nate.
Absolutely. And I think it's egregious that we have 1.7 million adverse events that have been reported on this mRNA injection. And it's anywhere from, rashes and hives, but all the way to death, and, all the miscarriages and everything that go along with it. But yet we're still not willing to say, look, we know it's not safe. We know it's not effective, and they're not banning it and pulling it off the market. But, our focus has really been on the hospital protocols, because those hospital protocols are still being used today.
Yep.
And,
I was just
Rachel's right.
I was just at the VA last week, and they were still pushing the COVID vaccine. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I'm like, seriously, you guys are still pushing this crap?
Yeah, that's right.
How is it, we know now that it does absolutely nothing, for these, new variants and things like that. And even if it did before, it certainly didn't stop the spread of it. But yet they're still selling it to people that you need to get this so you don't, you don't spread COVID, which is just nonsense.
And I think that's what's so wonderful about what Rachel has done in formulating this brief and coming alongside us in Oklahoma, and not just in Oklahoma, but in Texas, Louisiana, Missouri, Florida, coming along these groups and saying, to the attorney generals and to the district attorneys, it's time to stand up. And it is time to not let medical freedom be a hot potato, but to, have accountability, to have justice, and to ensure that this never happens again, because we know what they're doing. They're out there. Peter Hotez is out there talking about H5N1. And I mean, he threw in Zika and yellow fever. And I think the kitchen sink was in there about that. That was coming on January 21st of 2025. Oh, how convenient is that?
It's too bad we can't inoculate.
I wonder why that date.
Right on.
Well, I
Right
mean, we should mock what wicked people do. I think that's important, because we should take away their power and the fear that people have of them. But we should also take them seriously, because all of this that came up with COVID was planned in advance. So when you hear somebody saying, "Oh, another thing is coming," take it seriously. That's why we won't stop fighting.
Yep.
Because we want to make sure that when the next thing comes.
Yep. That's why I read their books. I follow what's going on at the World Economic Forum. I read Klaus Schwab's book, that he came out, I think it's fourth industrial revolution. And he's talking about now that the next thing that's coming is a massive cyber, security, cyber attack. So that's my bailiwick, my background for the last 27 years. So I'm paying attention to these things. Because they were talking about COVID, they were doing, test runs, and it's clear. Yep. And I think one of the things that they did, I think one of the things they were hoping to find out was just how compliant the American people would be. Right. And the fact is 70% of people complied.
That's right. So, and how convenient is it that, they're talking about a cyber attack, and the UN just gave Secretary Gutierrez back in September of 2024, the massive amount of being really dictator over the world, because that pact for the future that, is in place. I mean, they didn't get any congressional approval. They just put in place. He gets to call if it's a black swan, if it's outer space, if it's cyberspace, if it's healthcare. I mean, are you kidding me? It's like everything is covered underneath there. He gets to call it if it's a potential pandemic or risk. He gets to mitigate all of that.
Yep. I'm so thankful to God that Trump was elected and that he's going to get in there. I hope that he gets the right people that are going to go after this. And I think that one of the things that needs to happen, and it probably needs to happen at the federal level, but also I think at the state legislatures, is I think there need to be hearings. I think there need to be hearings, and there has to be accountability for these things, so that, things are put in place to prevent this from ever happening again. I've got to cut to a commercial break. Sorry, I've got to cut to our commercial break, but as soon as I get back, Rachel, I'm going to turn to you, because I do have some other questions that I want to ask you about, including Oklahoma's Attorney General and their addressing these systemic failures, as well as the responses that you've seen from authorities. We will be right back after a quick break, but folks, make sure and stay with us, because this is only going to get more interesting.
It says, I woke up this morning and looked out the door to a country I don't recognize. They put masks on our face to hide our pain, and there's no fire in most people's eyes. And it's still true today. It's still true today that they've tried to destroy the American spirit. And in some instances, they've done a dadgum good job. But in other instances, they have lit an inferno in some people. And we right now are gathering some of those people that are on freaking fire to save this country.
Increasing expenses have caused us all a lot of pressure these days, and it's affecting even the wealthiest of people. Most have lost their sense of security, stability, and even hope for a strong financial future. The game plan of everyone in your cell phone has likely been disrupted or even hardcore stopped, and most are looking for a creative solution to regain financial momentum. Oftentimes, life's best solutions are the simplest. But first, a question. What is something most people think they should own but don't? Crypto? Fine art? Real estate? Nope. We are talking about real money, the kind kings and queens fought for and large institutions today buy in mass. We're talking about gold and silver, assets that provide confidence in tough financial situations. So the question is, do you own any? If you don't, you're not alone. Most people aren't maximizing the power of precious metals because it's just been too complicated. And even though they see advertisements about gold and silver daily, they don't really know who to trust. That is, until now. The bottom line is that buying gold and silver doesn't have to be complicated or scary. There's a simple, better way to accumulate assets and create financial peace, headache-free. And this very minute, a new community of average people are seeing above average results to the tune of tens of millions in assets over the last few years. This system is tested, it's simple, and it's not an experiment. To date, it's helped more than 80,000 people bring hope back into their lives. It's invitation only, and right now, this new community has accepted a challenge to give away as much free gold this year as possible. Curious? Learn how to get your free gold today. Check out the next step to get the details.
Welcome back to the Raising Cain Show. I'm your host, Nate Cain, and tonight we're joined by two courageous advocates, Mic Rosado and Rachel Rodriguez, who are at the forefront of exposing systemic failures in our healthcare system. Let's pick up where we left off. I think right before I cut to break, I apologize for interrupting you, Rachel, but you were about to say something.
Sure. I was just going to mention, because you were talking about hearings at the federal level under the new administration. And I wanted to point out one reason we have gone on a state basis for for criminal investigation and prosecution is because we don't know what the federal government is going to do, but the states have the authority to prosecute federal officers, notwithstanding what people are saying that there's immunity. That is not entirely true. They may have a requirement to pursue these charges in a federal court, but the states have an obligation and a right to investigate and prosecute crimes under state law that have occurred to constituents in the state. So that's why we're doing it at that level, because we also, I think Mick discussed this very well, we need to be, as the people, we need to be asking our local governments and our state governments to act in accordance with our self-governing requirements. And one of those is when there are crimes that have occurred at this level nationally, they need to be investigated and there needs to be accountability. Mm-hmm. And so that's why we've approached it this way. And each state does have perhaps a little bit different process. In Oklahoma, you can go straight to the Attorney General and request the Attorney General to open the investigation. In other states like Louisiana and Texas, you have to go to the district attorneys first. So we tried to follow the process, and we have looked at the state code in each state, and we're tailoring the briefs in each state so that it's easier for law enforcement to move forward.
Well, I'll tell you, I would love to work with you at looking at what we could do here in West Virginia, because I think we saw Absolutely. A lot of things happen here, and we had a lot of deaths that I think were related to that. The Oklahoma Attorney General, I for one, I think you're absolutely going about this the right way. This was the mistake made after the 2020 election. They should have gone through the states first, because what we had ended up happening is we had, federal government basically didn't want to do anything about it. And, it was within the state's purview to go after violations of their own election laws, and they could have gone after, the federal government for this. The biggest problem that I see with these types of cases when they go, through the federal government is that the FBI is notorious for not wanting to, investigate their own, and the DOJ doesn't want to prosecute their own. And so, if you've got whereas it's in the state's interest to protect its citizens. And so that's why you have a separation of powers, and it makes it much, I think, it makes it more amenable to, to bring these types of cases from, the Attorney General. So I think that's great. Now, how has the Oklahoma Attorney General responded to your requests, for these types of things?
Well, the brief was submitted to him 2 days before Thanksgiving. We haven't heard anything, which is why, Nate, we are going into the communities. If they say 20,000 people, according to the CDC, died, then we want to find those people. And what we are finding, we actually went this last Tuesday to Ada. And every time we go, more and more and more people come forward. And it's not just people who died of the hospital protocols, it's people who survived the hospital protocols and now have renal failure and now have pulmonary issues. And then there were many people where they were told when they were in the hospital they had to get the mRNA injection. Well, then on top of that, they have been debilitated. Or we've actually had people who were said, you cannot go in and see your loved one because, they weren't letting anyone in, right? They were kicking everybody out.
People died
They were
alone.
saying, exactly. And
That's
that
right.
makes me sick to my soul.
Me
It
too.
really does, because these are precious living souls created by God. Our rights come from Him, not from the government. And so they were telling these people, you have to get this injection in order to come in to see your loved one. Well, that's coercion.
Yes,
So
it is.
that's why we are going across the state and we are engaging people. So we actually have started in Ada, and now we're going to Sapulpa, which is really close to Tulsa. And we are trying to go more into the rural areas because we know that a lot more of the people who are in the rural areas have not heard this. They're still under the impression that, their loved one died of COVID. And, Nate, they did not. They died of hospital protocols and then subsequently of the injections that they were given if they took the mRNA. So, we are hoping that he will hear us as I'm tagging him on everything and as we're live streaming our events, but we're also doing email and phone banks, and we're doing these campaigns, and we're gathering constituents together to make the case to him to say, this is much bigger than you think it is. Because really, I mean, when it comes down to it, you've also got people who lost their job. You got people whose children were negatively impacted because they had to wear a mask. All of that plays into that. So I think we are hoping that we are going to have a large enough groundswell that it will stop him and prick his ears and prick his heart.
I have a comment that somebody made, and I want to pull it up because it brings to light, I think, an important part of the conspiracy, or the organized crime. So I want to ask you, Rachel, about this. So
Sure.
the comment there is that this was planned, and insurance companies set protocols to the medical industry. What have you found what tell me about in your findings what you found about insurance companies and their involvement in this?
Well, to be honest, Nate, and I think that's Frank. So thank you, Frank, for watching. He's been in really in all of this stuff, and he's been instrumental. So we really appreciate his work. I was focused mainly on sort of the highlights. So I haven't gotten deep into what the insurance companies were doing so much as I was looking at what CMS was doing, engaged with the FDA and CDC. But you have the collusion. I mean, they're definitely a party here.
And who's CMS for those that may not know?
This would be the what is it? Mick, what is this? It's Centers for
Medicare, Medicaid. Yes, Centers for
Medicare and Medicaid. Thank you.
Medicaid services.
Got it.
So what you have is obviously the money is coming either directly from, you've got the Medicaid or Medicare, but you've also got people who have their insurance, and all of these protocols, all the payments are coming through the third parties. So they have to be part and parcel of this. And of course, one of the things I do understand is that the insurance companies could decide, well, we're not going to cover you if you don't get a mRNA shot, or we're not going to cover this thing over here.
Certainly there were people,
but we will cover this other thing. And so you not only have the protocols and the policy from the federal level coming down, but you have it enforced by the third party payer in your case. So it's not just the governmental third party payer, but also your private entities. I mean, question whether they're really private at that point.
Yeah,
but
there's a lot of moving.
It's all part of the enterprise.
A lot of moving parts in this. And in fact, like I think about, I think it was my aunt that, she had scheduled surgery and she had to postpone it because they wanted her to get vaccinated before they would do the surgery. And she's like, I'm not getting vaccinated.
Yeah.
And then you had people who were awaiting transplants and they were denied, even though they had been waiting and they got approved. Then COVID protocols come and they say, well, you got vaccinated or we're not going to, allow you to get that transplant. We'll give it to somebody else who has been vaccinated. It's just unbelievable the types of coercive, tactics that were used on people.
Yeah.
I want to ask.
Look, it goes all the way. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Nate.
No, please finish your sentence. Because I've got a question that's sorry, I was just saying I have a question that's a little bit different or a little off topic. So I want you to finish your thought.
I was just, it's kind of an aside, it's a tangent, but the truth is the mRNA was pushed at every single level, including immigration. I do immigration law. I've kind of gotten out of it because of the COVID era. I've been doing more of that litigation. But people aren't allowed to get their green card unless they can show a COVID shot. And one of my clients hadn't gotten it yet. We did his filing for the green card. And then I found out from his mother that in order to do the whole panel of, there's a medical exam you have to do, he went and got it and had been sick for several days. And I was sick to my stomach because had I known, I would have told her, let's do a waiver. I didn't know. And I have to be cautious with people. You can't scare people, you don't want to do that, but you also want to, you don't want to get too involved in their own business. But one of my clients, in fact, this is what happened. I just wanted to mention that it's everywhere. You can't move in this country or get into this country without that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I was working at the time as a contractor for the federal government, and the company that I was working for, once those protocols came into place that said that any company that was, a small business or mid-size that was over 10 people, you were forced to require your employees to get vaccinated. And the thing that was really strange to me, and I never could figure this out, is under HIPAA laws, my employer doesn't have a right to ask me anything about my, about my medical care. And yet they can ask me if I'm vaccinated. It just seemed like it was a contradiction of current law. And I was pretty upset by it. And I told him, I was no holds bar. I told him, how I felt about it. And I said, look, I'm a Christian. I don't have a problem with vaccines, but I have a problem with coercion and the government telling me what to do, because in my religion, we have prophecies about the future and where a world government will tell us we have to take a mark. And if we don't, we're going to not be able to buy, not be able to sell, not be able to eat. I said, this seems an awful lot like that. And I said, now, if I give into this now, then I'll be more likely to give into it then. So I'm not going to, because of the fact that you're coercing. And that was my justification. And actually, I think that was I used that argument to help my son devise a religious exemption in the military, and it was successful, at least in delaying things. He, of course, didn't get promoted during that time, but at least he was not kicked out. Now, it's just unbelievable how much has happened to so many different people. But I lost my job eventually. They said, get vaccinated or, you can't work here. And I said, all right, bye. I started my own company. And but what are the things right now that people can do to support your efforts to open grand jury investigations? What steps can they take?
Well, Well, I can tell you that one of the biggest things is for them to come out to the town halls that we are having. We are live streaming them as well, Nate. We want everybody to hear this message because, like Rachel said, we're doing this in Oklahoma, and Oklahoma should be kind of one of the RICO charges that she had mentioned was terrorism. And that should take place in Oklahoma because we're well aware of what happened back in 1995 with Timothy McVeigh. But we want people to understand that while we're digging in and we're fighting in Oklahoma, it's not just Oklahoma, it's across the nation. And they're going to hear from lawyers and they're going to hear from medical experts, but they're also going to hear from the people who were left behind, the widows and the widowers who are standing there saying, my loved one died of the COVID hospital protocol. I have their medical records. I can show what happened to them, where they were starved, where they came out after intubation and facial bones were broken, where we were denied, where they were being put into palliative care plans and nobody knew about it. Nobody was being told. DNRs with the name patient written down below were being put on their chart and used as do not resuscitate orders. And that's not just Oklahoma, it's across the nation. So we're live streaming them, and we really want people to come out this January 30th. We're going to be at the Praise Center Ministries in Sapulpa, Oklahoma. And that's going to be 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. But we're also live streaming it. So they can also go to intentionalpodcast.com. And Rachel has her website. I want her to give that so that people can go and they can listen and see what we're doing and join us.
What other states are adopting similar approaches that you know about? And how can this effort be expanded at the national level?
Well, what Verus Law has done, I started in Florida because I'm here in South Florida. I don't think I mentioned that to your audience. I'm out of West Palm Beach. And so that's my state, and I started there. What we've done is we've partnered with former Feds group, and because they've done such a great job in their, Mick, help me out, it's the Community Betrayal Project. What's the full name?
It is the COVID Humanity Betrayal Project, but if you go to betrayalproject.org or chbmp.org.
Thank you. I always forget these acronyms, but they have done such a phenomenal job in reaching out to victims all across the country, and from there we've been able to reach to those people in each state. And so what we've done is, I don't represent these people as an attorney. I'm a private attorney, and I cannot bring criminal prosecution in most states. But what I've done is, as an advocate, I am bringing, my brief and saying to law enforcement, either the district attorneys or the attorneys general, here, this is what we believe to be the evidence. We believe it meets these elements of these crimes under your state code. And here are the victims who want to press charges. Here's their contact information. Here's the deceased patient. And here's the next of kin. That's what we've done state by state. And so after Florida, we filed in Texas, Louisiana, obviously Oklahoma, Missouri. We're working on Minnesota. We've gotten some requests in other states. And frankly, it doesn't matter if we think that the AG or the DAs are going to do something or not. It doesn't matter if we think, they're very blue or not. That doesn't matter, because if you don't ask, you don't get. And
That's
so
true.
Another point is we have to be pressing for this everywhere. One thing I wanted to mention to your audience is, this is a nonpartisan issue. Homicide is not a partisan issue.
Right.
So this is something that I think we have a great chance, even if we think maybe that the law enforcement officer, the prosecutor, might look at this sideways. We don't know if they lost a loved one. in the
That's right.
hospitals, and seeing this
Right.
might trigger something for them, and they would be
So
willing to do something, because this is horrific. It's not
it
this.
is.
We should not stand for this, and this is another reason why, in the entirety of the COVID, the COVID criminal enterprise, there's many areas of misconduct we could have addressed. We chose the hospital homicide in large part because it's very clear what the outcome is. There isn't there aren't the same minefields as they are with the shots, because well, was it was it the shot or was it something else? No, there is and pardon me for being blunt, but there is a dead body. What happened? And we're able to say, no, it was murder, and it's not okay. And here are all the things that happened until that point. And here's the money that people got for doing it.
Yeah.
So
Well,
it's still going to be an uphill climb, but it's a good area to focus on, I think.
Case in point, I think there's been some movement on, like in New York, on the former governor, who had pushed for, for people with COVID to be, placed in rest homes, with the elderly.
Oh yes,
and
Bobby Ann Cox has been working on that.
And that's I think that's going somewhere. So to me, I agree with you. I don't think it matters whether they're a blue state or a red state, because you're right. Everybody's been impacted by this. And I think you're going after medical malpractice. There's no politics involved in that at all. It is purely, did the hospital do things, that were to benefit themselves financially and, that were harmful to their patients. And I think that's low hanging fruit, and it's a good place to start. Wow.
It is, but it's difficult. I mean, I will say this. Oh, sorry, Nate. One thing that's difficult is we're looking at the criminal end of this. So, the burden there, saying they knew that they were harming people. But see, we think the evidence is clear at this point.
Yeah, and the
you're
other
getting
point
money
too,
to do this.
Yeah, I think the other issue too is that in the case of the vaccine, emergency use authorization and other laws that have been passed by Congress, which I think should be completely reversed. I can't remember the name of the law, but basically prevents, from people being able to sue.
PrEP Act.
Yeah, thank you. The PrEP Act. Those things make it very difficult going after the vaccine manufacturers. But I do think that, that in this case, I don't think there's anything that would preclude that, but it's still, you have to get somebody else. You got to get the attorney general or, a district attorney to be able to go. They have to take that case on. And that's the challenge. So what that means is that we need people to speak out. We need people to call their attorney general's office. We need people to contact their governors. This is how, or use their state legislature, to go and bring these things up. Political pressure is how it's going to happen, and I think that's how we do it.
Exactly it.
We got to win first in the court of public opinion.
That's right. And I want
to remind the audience.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I think there's a lag on my end, and I apologize for that. I didn't see that in the sound check, but I want to also tell your audience that it's not just political pressure, but people speaking out gives political cover. So as the people cry out for it, then the DA is like, look, I had all these people call my office. I've got to do something.
That's right.
That's exactly
our
it.
State, our AG is elected, and if he wants to get elected again, he better listen to the people.
Right.
So it gives. You're right. It does give him cover.
Absolutely. And if you have anybody who is maybe an attorney general and maybe they're looking to move on toward governor or something like that, then, that is where the people need to step in and say, okay, but you work for us. You
Mhm.
know, we are the one who voted you in, and really they need to address that issue, because we can't just hide under the covers and not investigate any of this, because we know that history will repeat itself. And we have
Absolutely.
a precedent now. You know, we have, you know, no patient left alone bills, but they've left big gaping holes in it so that the hospital can say, well, if we decide, then we can
Right.
kick you out, you know. And so it's up to we the people, and that's why I think we're really standing on that lesser magistrate and saying, you know, you work for the will of the people. And that's another reason why we
Mhm.
want everyone to come out and be involved. And I want everybody to give, if I could give those websites really quickly.
I was just gonna,
Nate,
I
again.
was just gonna ask if you would, because we're just about out of time, and I want to give an opportunity for you one more time, if you could let people know, and not just one of the websites that you mentioned was about where people whose family members or loved ones, are victims of these hospital protocols. Where you mentioned an organization or a website. Can you repeat that, and then the other websites that you had mentioned?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for that opportunity. So the group is called Former Feds Group Freedom Foundation. And one of their projects is the COVID Humanity Betrayal Memory Project. That is C as in cat, H as in hat, B as in bat, M as in Matt, P as in Pat.org. So I want everybody to go there. You can be connected, and they are nationwide. And then, of course, please come out. I'm not going to worry about my website, because I want them to go to chbmp.org. But I do want everybody to come out or tune into Intentional with McMeow on Rumble. January 30th, we're going to be at the Praise Center Ministries in Sapulpa, Oklahoma, January 30th, 6 to 9 p.m.
And
And
I also want to mention, Nate, if I can,
sure.
well, my law firm is viruslaw.group, but I want to note that if anybody wants to support financially this project, because I and my associate Mimi Miller have done this, it's a project because we fear God and we want to see justice. But if people want to donate to that, Former Feds has partnered with us, and they can go to the Former Feds website and donate there. And it's you have to mark AG project, meaning Attorney General project, and we're very grateful for that. But definitely, that's the website that Mick mentioned. That's really important, so people can record their story and what happened to their loved one or to them personally.
Yes.
That's great. Well, I want to thank you both for coming on and sharing this important information for our listeners. I see this is probably the greatest travesty of our generation, and it is so wicked what the government and what the corporations and the hospitals and all of those that have profited off of harming people should not only be ashamed of themselves, but they need to be put in prison. So I'm grateful for you and the fight that you're doing. There's a lot of people that talk, not a lot of people actually take action, and I'm glad to see that you guys are taking action. That's awesome. So thank you for being on this. I also recognize, though, and you'd mentioned that there are challenges to this. It's for one, it's not in your hands as to whether or not the district attorney or an attorney general will take on a case. But the one thing I've learned is that God can influence people. And so we've got to pray, and we've got to ask for God's help in this, because we're not alone in this. We have we've got somebody that that has great concern for those that are innocent, and I think that God desires justice as well. So with that, I always like to close my show in prayer, and I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. And so, Heavenly Father, Lord, I just thank you so much for these two brave women and what they're doing, and the other people who are behind the scenes and helping with this effort. God, I pray for their victory in this. I pray, Lord, that you would move the hearts of the attorney generals that you would move the hearts of governors and of district attorneys and legislators, Lord, so that there would be a great outcry and people would be forced to deal with this, that they would not turn a blind eye to it, that they would not ignore it. But Lord, I pray that you would give courage to the families that have become victims. I pray, Lord, that you would help them to stand up and give them the articulate words to speak eloquently and share the stories about what has happened to them so that others will be moved to do something. I pray that our political environment that we live in would not allow this issue to become politicized, but that it would be an issue of what is right and what is wrong, and that we would deal with it appropriately. And I pray that you would provide the financial resources needed for all of these activities and the things that are going on for the legal matters. Lord, I know how much you can provide when it comes to legal needs. Lord, you did it in my life, and I pray that you would do it here in this instance for the sake of all of those that are innocent that have suffered. And Lord, I pray that you would please bring victories in these cases, and that you would bring those that are guilty of these crimes to justice. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Nate.
And Rachel, where both Mick and Rachel, where can people follow you on social media? And if you wouldn't mind, just give a shout out to, wherever, whatever your websites are as well.
Sure. Intentionalpodcast.org is my website. You can follow me on Rumble at Intentional with Mick Meow. And on X, I am at Mick Meowed.
And Rachel?
Mine is Virus Law Group. That's VIRES. It's Latin for power. VirusLaw.group. And on X, I'm Ray Rod ESQ. That's RAROD ESQ.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, folks. Remember to like and subscribe to this show. And you can follow me at Nate Cain for WV on all social media, X, Facebook, Twitter, or, I guess that's X now, Getter, Gab. So I'm on a lot of them, even Fakebook. And I would love to see you guys and follow me on there. Check out the show. You can catch my show, all of the shows that I do, because I do this and as well as some talk radio. And I publish a Substack. And you can find all that at theraisingcaneshow.com. Again, stay vigilant, stay strong. Don't lose hope, but put your faith in God and he will deliver you. God bless and good night.
Amen.
Raise some Cain. You gotta raise some Cain. In the heartland where the faith runs strong, we've seen the shadows growing long. Watch those around us be deceived. Yeah, the fight is at our doors, no matter who we believe. Corruption, lawless day and night, we'll speak the truth into the light. We'll bring the battle, heed the call, watch the whole thing fall. We gotta raise some Cain, show the lies, break some chains and make things right. Feel the power, be the change, time is now. We gotta raise some Cain.